Welcome to DC Automotive's training videos, where we show you the right way to do auto repairs. In today's video, we are going to show you the right way to do a brake job. Let's get started. First, we need to remove the front tires and turn the spindle assembly to gain access to the caliper mounting bolts and remove them. Pry the caliper off and make sure it's secure and not hanging or putting stress on the brake hose. Remember, it's only rubber. Remove the caliper mounting bracket from the spindle assembly and set it aside for cleaning later. Next, remove the rotor. Using jacking bolts is the safest way, but if the rotor is too rusted, then a good whack with the hammer will always do the trick. Remember to strike the rotor on the inside between the bolts to not damage the rotor. Now we need to check the thickness of the rotor to see if we have enough to work with. If not, we'll need to replace the rotor. Using the rotor and drum manual, we look up what the thickness should be for this automobile. For the 1999 to 2002 G20, we have a machine thickness of 0.787. Now we take the micrometer, turn it on, and zero it out. Then, making sure it's flat against the rotor, we measure it. We have a reading of 0.854, which tells us it's thick enough to work with. Now we need to cut the rotor surface to have something for the new pads to bite into. You don't want to put pads on this because it's so shiny and glazed that they'll never make a good seat, which will create noises and other problems. Next, we need to remove the rust from the rotor so that it sits flush in the machine for a better cut. We do this using the grinder on the surface and a piece of emery cloth for the inside rim. It's not a bad idea at this time to put on safety glasses and a face mask. In this case, our machine grabs the rotor on the inside, so we need to make sure this section is free of rust also. Use the emery cloth to clean the inside rim. Make sure it is free of all rust particles by wiping or blowing it off. Now it's time to mount the rotor on the machine. Notice where the adapter connects to the rotor. This is why we need to clean this area for a secure fit. Attach the spring to reduce vibrations for a smooth cut. Now we set the machine to cut the rotor. For the initial cut, we adjust the cutters to just make contact with the rotor. Then we keep readjusting the cutters until we reach our desired cut. You can see how nice and clean it is using the rough cut. Now we will make one final pass using the fine cut. We went from a number 10 coarse cut to number 1 fine cut. Once the final cut is finished, you will notice a pattern on the rotor similar to that of a vinyl record. This pattern will cause the pads to not seat properly, so we need to remove this pattern using our swirl cut tool. Before this process, the mechanic would tell the customer to drive a few hundred miles, braking slowly to break in the rotors. This swirl cut step eliminates the break-in period. Let's apply the swirl cut. Another good time for the safety apparel. Looking at the rotor now, you can see how the pattern is broken up, which will cause the pads to seat properly. It's time now to remount the rotor. But before you do, make sure the rust is removed from the hub assembly to avoid cocking on either the rotor or the mounting bracket. They need to sit straight. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try to get the heaviest amount of rust off. Next, blow off the assembly and rotor to remove any residual powder or shaving. Then wash off the rotor with brake clean to remove any leftover shavings. Mount the rotor using one bolt to secure it. It's time now to work on the brake pads. Stepping on the brake pedal causes the brake fluid to flow through the hose and pushes the caliper piston out to squeeze the pad against the rotor. This piston is completely extended and needs to be retracted. This is where we use the caliper collapse tool to push the piston back in. The piston is now retracted. Now it's time to deal with the brake pad assembly. Remove the old pads and shims. Sometimes new pads come with shim kits, but if they don't, be sure to clean the old shims thoroughly, front and rear. At this point, check to make sure the caliper slide pins slide freely. If they don't, you'll need to take them apart and clean them also. Cleaning the brake pad assembly can be done using a wire brush, sandpaper, or a whiz wheel. But the best way is to use a sandblaster, which we will do here. This will give you the best results. This is a before and after sandblasting look at both the assembly and shims. You'll notice that even where the bolts go has been sandblasted. This will help it to sit flush and avoid cocking. As you can see, the shims are completely clean of rust. At this point, blow off any residual sandblasting remnants and replace the shims onto the assembly. They should be as clean as possible to avoid grinding. After replacing the shims, apply a generous amount of synthetic lube to help the pads glide easily. Take the bolts for the mounting bracket and apply a coating of red Loctite. Insert the bolts and tighten. Put the pads on, making sure they move freely.
Put on the caliper.
Apply a layer of blue Loctite to the bolts and tighten, making sure it slides freely. Now replace the tire, making sure not to over-tighten the lug nuts. Over-tightening will cause the rotor to warp, thereby undoing all of the work you've just done. Once the tires are on, you're done. Thanks for watching DC Automotive's video. Join us again next time to see the right way to do automotive repairs.